There is no shackle, only the eagle. Only the symbol of my vision. Only victory and self-directed growth. You have the power to control and shape your life to become the best possible version of yourself. Release yourself from the shackles of your past, of negative experiences and missteps. Let your vision of victory define your present and future, and look back only to see how far you have come. Victory!
Okay, so please, Chris, present yourself. Who are you? What do you do for a living? What's your facility like? Tell us about yourself.
All right. So I'm Chris Dъффин. I'm a powerlifter. I am an inventor. I am a developer of unique methods. I own my own training facility as well. So I have a kind of a pretty unique background as far as how I got involved in the sport and where I came up with my methods, because I'm actually an engineer. Well, I've got a couple engineering degrees from a long time ago, but I've been running businesses and stuff like that for a long time, and been doing powerlifting and owning the gym on the side. But I've been using kind of that engineering mindset with revising tools, revising methods, and the business side with developing networks with professionals in the clinical rehab field. So as a powerlifter, I'm pretty accomplished. So I've been ranked #1 in the world for tons of years for either squat, deadlift. I'm starting to pick up a lot of feedback here.
Really?
There. Okay, we're good.
Is it good? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
I've held the all-time world record on the squat several times in the 220-pound class, and in the gym right now, I'm the only person in the world that I know of that is, or I'm the lightest person in the world squatting and deadlifting over 900 pounds. But I'm more proud of not my lifting, but my coaching. So I've got a really unique approach to understanding movement, correcting movement patterns, and that's something I'm really proud of. Essentially, in the strength training world, I'm really the kind of known as the movement guru. I'm the guy that brings a lot of the top level athletes will come to when they've got issues, and that's I have a really strong network of people that I work with on the clinical side, but I'm the one bringing it to in the trenches, the strength athletes, strength coaches. This is how you actually put it together and put it to use for those of us that put big weights on our back or in our hands. And I've got a portal that we'll talk about later, but it's really the only system like it in the world where people are putting it together in this fashion. So something I'm really proud of. And then like I said, I'm an inventor, so I've got a few patents on several different training tools that reduce stress, allow people to lift better. My goal is to share knowledge, share tools, so that people can live better through strength. And that's just something I'm incredibly passionate about.
I see. So tell us more about your facility now. What is it like?
So our facility, it's called the Kabuki Strength Lab, because really that's what we consider it as. It's our human performance lab. It's where we test our equipment, test our methods. I'm a big proponent of, not using bro science, that we take ideas and we validate them. But it's a 9,000 square foot facility, and it encompasses, it's basically a strongman gym, a powerlifting gym, kettlebell mace gym. We've got a full commercial gym as far as equipment. We run meets there. We're actually holding the APA World Championships there this fall. So it's a really fantastic facility. In my opinion, it's one of the best in the United States. We have a lot of people that travel. It's kind of a destination place for a lot of people to come to because of how unique it is.
I see. That's very nice. We like strength facilities. So
we also made some of your equipment by yourself. We see a lot of videos. Some of your equipment is made by you. I mean, some benches, you invited some elevated models, you know. It's,
yes,
we
yes.
never see these benches before. Like,
So hopefully you'll actually be seeing that. I'm opening the fabrication division this year for my equipment business. So we'll be going into some products that some of the stuff. But yeah, I essentially early on when I started the gym, I built everything in it, and then later we'd buy out another gym and so on. So now we've got a mixture of other equipment in there, but all the core big like strength training stuff. That was all hand built by me back a number of years ago. So I definitely appreciate the trades, you know, where you do and make things with your hands, you know, and to me, there's always I like to tinker and make things better, and
Yes,
so that's why I made my own stuff, because nothing out there met my standards.
yes, it's funny. I have the same passion because even if you get a great product, you know how to do it even better. Why not, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So how tell us more about your childhood, if you're okay with this, because a lot of our readers don't know you, and
Okay.
I feel they would feel very empowered to know that people who are strong not because only they lift big weights, but because they overcome big challenges. So what was it like to handle so much responsibility since you were young? That I believe will be very interesting for our readers.
Yeah, so I definitely had a pretty unconventional life growing up. So I grew up essentially homeless for the most part of my upbringing, or at least half of it, where we were living in the mountains of Northern California or Oregon. Sometimes we'd be living in like condemned homes, or you know, maybe it was a shack that didn't have electricity or water. So that was my upbringing. I had 4 younger siblings, and I put myself, you know, I did pretty well academically. So I was in sports. I was valedictorian in my high school, and I was able to get myself to where I was able to get a full ride academic scholarship to put myself through college. And so it was interesting. I mean, like I said, you know, I didn't have a lot of friends growing up because, you know, I was the smelly kid with bad clothes that that lived in a trailer down by the river essentially. And but then I moved to go to college, and things got really worse at home after I left. And so while I was putting myself through college, I ended up taking custody of my 3 younger sisters. And I raised all of them through their teenage years while I worked on my engineering degrees, while I worked on my master's in business. And the whole time I was working, you know, I was working full time to support my life, their life, and all that as well. But I mean, school was pretty easy for me. So that really didn't take a big toll on me. I graduated top of my class in the engineering. And then I continued to, you know, so that was the early life. I got all my sisters raised. They have all started their own lives, and I feel very good, and I'm proud about that. I continued to progress into the work world and became a corporate executive. I was basically general manager or director of operations, responsible for running or turning around businesses, and I did that at an executive level for the last decade. I worked in the industry for close to 20 years, and then just this last year, finally decided to chase my passion. And like I said, you know, that's where I'm at now, with running the facility and putting new products and ideas on the market, so that people can live better through strength.
I see. That is interesting. I have additional question. Do you believe all these hardships made you stronger? Do you believe this? Yes.
I want to be clear to people that you don't have to have, you know, those hardships to be a strong person. So my view is I accomplished all of that because I had a vision for my life, and I executed it. I chose what my future was going to be, and I worked towards that path, and that's how much you can accomplish. I went from nothing. I went from, you know, filling up gallon jugs in the creek and letting them sit in the sun so we could dump them over our heads once a week and have showers, to, you know, being a high-level corporate executive, to now just doing what I want to do with my life. But that was all through not letting circumstances or your environment be who you are. And a lot of people, you ask them, who are you? And they'll tell you some story about their environment or the things that have happened to them that made them who they are. And I say, that's bullshit. You decide who you are. And so my story isn't about the hardships, it's about what you can accomplish if you choose who you want to be and, you know, live that life. And so that's my view.
So it's all about inner game, right?
That's right.
Yes. Okay, so how did you get into training, Chris?
So I started lifting in high school. So I was the nerdy kid with not a lot of friends, and I'm like, oh, hey, I'm gonna get involved with sports. I'm gonna start lifting weights, and that's how I started. And so I started, oh God, sometime in my mid early teens, and I definitely took to strength training pretty well. And I've continued to train since then. I took a couple-year break from training when I was in college. Like I said, I was working. I had my own business. I was raising my sisters, and took a couple years off from training there. But outside of that, I've been lifting for 25 years. And then I got into powerlifting around 2000. I was training at a gym, and there was some guys prepping for a bodybuilding show, and they were big, they were massive, and I would run circles around them in the gym. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go ahead and do a bench press competition just to say, because I'm never going to compete in bodybuilding. I don't blow up like these guys do. So I'm going to do a bench press competition, and it turned out to be a bench press and deadlift competition. So I had to at that point, I decided to learn to deadlift about 3 or 4 weeks before the event. And I went and did it, and it was just so much fun. It was just like the light bulb went on, and I said, oh, so I'm doing this the rest of my life. So I did the bench and press deadlift competitions for about 3 years, and then I went into full powerlifting, and I've been doing that. So I've been competing for the last 16 years now.
That's a lot. It's a lot. We'll talk about some of your competing later on, I believe.
All right.
So now let's move on to what do you believe are the biggest gains, I mean benefits, someone can get from learning the basic 3 lifts? How about people who are not powerlifters? I mean, what would everyone gain from learning how to do the basic movements?
So it's interesting, the basic movements can actually tell you and teach you to do so much with the body in an integrated fashion that you could pick other ways to go about it, but these 3 lifts tell you everything. And so when I do my movement system seminars, we use the 3 lifts as a fundamental approach. And I have people there that are not powerlifters, they're chiropractors, they're physical therapists, they're, you know, all this stuff. But, you know, imagine taking a 60-year-old grandmother, and she can't pick up her granddaughter off the floor because her back pain's so bad. And she's afraid of it. And if you take her and teach her to deadlift, and these are what the clinicians, the chiropractors that I work with actually do, they take someone like that, and what do? They teach them bracing, they teach them to deadlift. And you know what? You're going to have that person in tears because they're going to learn, you know, in that session in, you know, half an hour, learn to deadlift, and they're going to be picking up a 35 or 44 pound kettlebell off the floor, and they couldn't bend it over to tie their shoes before. And they're going to be in tears because they're going to be able to, what that means to them is they're going to be able to hold that granddaughter or grandson that they weren't able to do. So that's, I mean, to me, there's so much that's going wrong with people's bodies in the world today. And it has to do with, there's a breakdown in breathing patterns, so that causes some upper back issues. We lose connection with the hip and pelvis due to the same reasons. There's a shortening of the psoas, deactivation of glutes. Like, there's a whole bunch of these patterns that continue to go about, and a lot of it is due to the stressors, that, you know, the high stress environment, the technology that we're on our phones, we're constantly on our computers. Like, all these things have an impact, let alone the self-consciousness of image and perception. So people are holding their stomachs in. You know, there's just a bunch of this stuff happens, and it's breaking people's bodies or how they work. And what we need to do is teach people how to move correctly, breathe correctly, all these things to happen. Do you know what? I don't know what it's like in, you know, Belgium, but but I'll ask you a question here. in America, what do you think is the #1 healthcare cost? Cancer, diabetes, heart disease.
Low back pain.
Low back pain is it. That is correct.
I know.
And so,
Can you imagine?
so that is the #1. That's the #1 healthcare cost in America, and it is completely. An individual owns it. You as a person can fix and manage and own that yourself. And so we can teach people to do that via squat, bench, and deadlift. There's so much, and I can, and I use those 3 as my assessment. I can tell nearly everything that's going on about the human body by watching those 3 lifts. And so it's important for everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're a power lifter or not. These are incredible tools because they it hits all aspects of the body.
Also all ages too, Chris, because
absolutely.
People are still afraid when you get older, to lifting heavy weights. But that's what I'm trying to teach here in our gym. People still.
I mean, at the end, we don't have to make everyone a world record holder. They just need to lift with perfect form and make sure their body is doing all that work with every muscle they have, so they are actually better, and they need not to fear, because there is a difference between trying to win Olympics and actually training for your own self and different goals.
Absolutely. So we call them mature lifters, because you asked about my gym, the lab. We have a bunch of 50 plus, 60 plus, 70 plus lifters, and this is what we teach them. This is how we get them there. And my training partner is 66. So just to give you this is what we live. This is what we preach.
I see.
And yep.
Okay, so moving on. Please tell us more about a little bit more advanced question: core tightness. Let's talk about some of your different movement systems and your online coaching as well. First of all, how do we identify the proper core tightness? I mean, what is proper core tightness during the day and then during the training? How do we do it, and how do we identify if the right amount of pressure, so to speak? Because what we learned from Magju is actually that it's not always about 100% pressure.
Absolutely. It's you can call it, some people call it high threshold and low threshold strategies. So like if you're picking up a bag of groceries or getting in and out of your car, you're going to have some core tightness, but not the same as if you're squatting 900 pounds. So same thing if you're doing a lighter weight for like 20 reps on a squat. You're going to have core tightness, but not to the same level, because you would fatigue out and then have failure. So, so yeah, you definitely have to match the threshold to the activity that you're doing. And so it's just really got to be balanced so that you can maintain that pressure over whatever length and duration of time. I mean, you could pressurize completely 100% to pick up that bag of groceries, because you're only going to do it once, but you don't need to. And if you do that all day long every day, you're probably going to fatigue yourself.
Okay, so how do we identify the right amount of pressure? Does this come with experience, or do we just mentally project it?
Yeah, that just comes with experience. So if you're losing positioning, you know that it's not enough. So like if your pelvis is starting to pull under and you're rounding, and you're getting what we call the butt wink in the squat, clearly you don't have enough for whatever movement that you're doing. So there's ways to do that, but really, the difference, I couldn't tell you the strategy for going what's the difference between a bag of groceries and a 900-pound squat. That's just going to come with experience. Unfortunately, a lot of people actually throw their back out when they go to pick up that bag of groceries.
Yes.
Or they've got 1 plate or 2 plates on the bar because they're just not concerned with it. It's so light, they just don't even think about it. And that's where actually most of your injury mechanisms come into play.
Yes, I really like a quote from Dave Tate: lift the lightweights like the heavyweights, always with perfect technique.
Yep, it's practice.
So during the DUFFIN movement system, how do you teach the core tightness? Do you have some basic philosophy around it, or Yeah.
Yeah, so we do a couple things. So one is we've got to explain to people that what core tightness is. And so a lot of people think it's air into the belly, or which is not the case. So it is, what it is working the diaphragm in opposition to the pelvic floor. So you have to, tell people what the diaphragm is, where it's at, and then we work a number of extrinsic cues to teach them how to activate it. So this is where, like, I'll talk about pulling, drawing at the sternum down. I think McGill went through with you like the Okinawan strength method.
Yes.
There's another one that we'll teach like rib cage position with. So a lot of it is dependent on what I see in a lifter, and if I'm coaching, I'll teach my coaches to work through a number of different cues. But there's one called the Levitt from Dr. Carl Levitt from the Prague School of Medicine that's really great at teaching the sternum position, where it's a forcible exhale. So you basically push every last drop of your breath out.
Yes.
And we're talking every last breath. So it's at the end you're just getting every little drop out, and then you have the person bring awareness to the sternum position in that position, and then have them fill up their belly and breathe while holding that sternum position. Another one that we'll do is called the dead bug.
Yes.
Where you're laying on the floor, arms reached into the air, and the legs in triple flexion. So 90 at the hip, 90 at the knee, 90 at the ankle, and we'll put a strap directly under the sternum, between that and the back and the floor, and we'll make them hold that strap. So I'll try to pull it out from under them. So if they're raising their chest up, the strap will come loose and pull out.
Yes. So they have to consciously actually execute the...
They have to execute it. So you're pulling on it, and then you make them actually pressurize while holding that. And then the triple flexion allows them to get really good pelvis position, so that at the hip. So those are things we have to bring awareness of pelvis position. So some people are not aware of that. We have to teach the position of the rib cage, and then we have to cue them. So now we've got good positioning on both sides of the core, because those we have to explain like an open scissor. So an open scissor is if either of those the pelvis is clocked forward or the chest is up, that diaphragm is not working opposite the pelvic floor. So those two have to be clocked and facing each other. So that diaphragm's going to drive down. It's like a piston, and it's going to create pressure now. So as it drives down, it's going to create pressure. If the chest is up or the pelvis is clocked forward, that pressure is going to go out towards the front, and we want it to go 360 degrees around the entire core. So those two have to be opposite each other. So it's not just in the belly. We need to be driving out through the obliques, into the back, all the way around. It's not a big belly full of air. And then it's not just the air. So it's two things working in opposition to each other. It is that intra-abdominal pressure is created through a little bit of that air from the diaphragm driving down, working against the outer sheath of the abdominal structure so that's where some people go wrong, and they just create a big giant belly full of air. And so this is where the Okinawan strength technique comes from that McGill went through. So if you karate chop or hit yourself, that's going to cue that rigidity on the outer sheath that it's working against.
Does this have to happen during the inhale or after?
It can be either. So, but imagine, so here's a good explanation for someone is, if you've got just a regular balloon and you blow it up, there's not much pressure. But if you take like a hot water bottle that like a strongman may blow up, it has much more pressure around the outside. So all of a sudden there's a whole lot more pressure if you try to forcibly blow that up. Does that make sense?
No. Let me ask you a different way. Do you get the core tight before you actually start to inhale, so that the air has outside feedback to stop and pressurize itself more, or does the whole muscle tightness happen after the diaphragm has descended enough?
Both happen at the same time.
I see.
Yep.
See. So you build the air and the pressure by itself in one single, step.
Yep.
Yes, I see, I get it. Okay, how about the pelvic floor muscles? That's very interesting topic to me, and no one is actually discussing enough. do they have to be tightened in a certain way, or are you not consciously, you know?
With this method, there's no conscious effort that needs to be made on that. We want to push out in the. We want to be. There's a couple different cues of where we want to push out. So that I'll give people. Some respond better than others. So one, we always need to make sure that the obliques are inflating. So we'll have people put their thumbs or their fingers right into their side, and we'll teach them to inflate those out, okay? And then we'll be able to teach them to do that, because at first people will want to do it with their, you'll see them take a bunch of air into their face or into their chest, and they're trying to, you know, do it with the air. So we want to teach them to do it without actually using air. So just engaging that. So that's that outer sheath, right?
Yes.
So we need to be able to do that. Then I may take my fingers into the lower abdomen, just above the legs. And what I'll tell the lifter to do is imagine as you're going down into the squat that you're inflating a balloon in that lower abdomen that's going to push out and against the legs and actually stop you. Now, that's not really going to happen unless you've got like a big heavy lifter, but that thought process, it helps them understand that it's right here in this position right there. Boom. And so if I'm teaching someone, you actually take your hands and open them up, and your index finger and your thumb. So if you put your thumb into the oblique, the index finger will be just far enough away. So other hand. Use your other hand there. Yep. There you go. And now see where your index finger is?
Yes.
That's where we want to inflate out low down there.
I see. So it's both of these locations are important.
Yep. Yep. Now if you've got a lifter that is getting sore in the upper erectors of the low back, I will take the fingers into a V, so the index and middle finger into a V like this, yes. And I'll find the rib cage, the bottom two, the lower the rib cage. So we want to teach one, obviously be aware that the sternum is going to stay pinned, but then right below that, you're going to have them inflate that with like a balloon. Boom.
No.
Now, yep, but keep the rib cage position. Keep the rib cage position. Now inflate that area like a balloon while maintaining it. So push his fingers out. There we go.
Without raising the chest.
Without raising the chest and without losing the sternum position. Now, if you reach around while he does that and put your hand about mid-back on the erectors.
Yes.
The other hand, yep. And so now have him do that and feel the change in the back when he does that.
Yeah, so what should I be feeling exactly? The change in the muscle activity.
See, do you feel the change in the muscle tension there?
Yes, I get it, yes.
Yep. So it's actually doing some stuff. So that's a really good cue for squatting that works really well for some people. So those are the two different primary cues for inflation that we use. We may also go into where you were just testing with the oblique,
yes.
Go around the back, almost to where you're on the QL.
Yes.
Yep. And have him inflate in that area.
That's very interesting.
I think you may need to go just a little bit lower there. So actually, around the height of where the belly button is. Boom. And then just outside of where the QL is.
Gotta feel the wear.
He has to breathe into the back diaphragm, right?
Yep. Yeah, where the belt would be, right there.
Yes.
And then you would inflate there. So some people miss that. You can see that. Usually I can see it in the deadlift if they're not inflating there. But those are some areas to check. So what you'll find is some people have dead spots in different areas. And so we want to find where those are and bring attention to that. And that's how we improve the quality. So core strength is not erector strength. It is not abdominal strength. It is quality of intra-abdominal pressurization. And so we want to practice that. So we practice, like if I'm doing the dead bug, or let's say the stir the pot on the ball. Miguel's a big fan of that.
Yes.
What I want to do is I focus people on not the repetitions or the time, but the quality, maintaining the quality of that pressurization, always trying to make it better.
Do you hold the air during the whole set of the stir the pot?
So there's two. So first we work on pressurization. So there's two functions of the diaphragm. So one is the breathing function and one is the bracing function. You can do both at the same time. So it's hard for people to grasp that at first. So typically I have them just focus on the bracing, and then we will start teaching them to actually hold that bracing while breathing. So, and you'll be able to learn. So that's the more advanced, is actually integrating those two functions together. So you should be able to do it and breathe and do your sets of 10 or whatever that is.
When you say breathe,
someone may not be able to master that right up front.
Does the breathing happen during the lift or only on the top portion for the squat, for example? When you master it for a sub-maximal weight, not just the the very max.
So that's where it depends. That's where we get back into the high threshold strategies versus the low threshold strategies. So if I'm doing a triple, I may breathe only at the top in between. But if I'm doing 20 reps, I'm not going to get enough air, so I'm going to end up passing out, by that time. So I'm actually going to be doing a little bit of breathing in and out during the lift.
I see.
But
this is a low threshold strategy.
Exactly.
Yes,
Yep.
I get it. So next question connected to that. Do you tighten, when you pressurize everything, do you try to tighten the muscles to the outside or to the inside, or just, in place, so to speak?
Can you repeat that?
When you're taking big breath with the diaphragm, and you're tightening the whole core, do you try to tighten and push out, or do you try to tighten the muscles to the inward side, or just in place?
So the inflation stuff that I just had you doing is actually tightening that. Yes. And so when you do that, we may not want to test that by actually to make sure that somebody's doing it with that forcible hit. So you should be able to, it's inflated but tight. So that's where, like in my facility, if someone's not doing it, I may walk up and punch them during the lift.
I see.
Because you should be able to take a punch.
Yes.
So you have air in there, but you can take a punch. It's rigid, it's solid, and that's where.
But do you consciously tighten your abs and your obliques and your back to the inwards, or do you push them to the outwards? If you get what I mean.
I do get what you mean. What's happening and how we cue it are two different things.
I see. So it depends on the person.
So, no, not necessarily. So the inflation stuff that I just had you do and had him check is going to create that tightness, but it is going to create that sheath really strong and tight so that it's working against the air. But in a sense, it feels like you're actually pushing it out, but you're actually creating rigidity that's going to work against it. So what I'm telling you to do and what's happening are two different things.
I see. Yes.
So if you pull it in, it's going to not work.
Yes. Yes, because it actually gonna break the.
You lose your tightness.
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
I actually often hit the people with the foam roller on the belly to.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yep.
Yeah. To make sure.
You're nicer. You're nicer than me.
Yes, I am. Okay, so how about if a person is flexion intolerant? Does the ribs down position still apply, or is it gonna be safer for him to lift the chest more? What do you feel about it?
So let's understand that the rib down position is not a crunched position at all. So it should not have them going into flexion at all. So it should put them in a strong neutral spine position. So if you watch somebody, if they arch and they get into an extended pattern, when they get to fatigue failure or a weight failure standpoint, they will then break down because they don't have good core stability or that good intra-abdominal pressurization, and then with load they will go into flexion. So what we want to do is we want to teach them that neutral pattern, and I do this all the time with rehabbing people from back injuries. And if you get the proper stabilization and you hold it, they will be able to maintain that neutral spine position and never break.
So it's wrong to actually pull the rib cage down by sheer pulling. It's right to do it only as much as the air is going to allow it to drop.
So if you do the forcible exhale and you teach the dead bug, you'll want to be watching to make sure that they're not doing this or actually pulling or crunching it down.
Yes.
It should only be happening in here. Boom. There's no crunch at all associated with it. So when they do it, they should end in a very neutral position. So it is not
concerning the angle of the rib cage, not the low back itself. so to speak.
Correct, correct.
Yes,
and it's also cueing the diaphragm to drive down. So that's one of the things. It's one of those extrinsic cues where I have them focusing on this, but it's actually doing something else.
I see, I see. Okay, so moving on, tension. Let's talk about tension on the squats, but not about the core. Let's talk about the active muscles. I've been always struggling to understand this because there are different quotes online, you know, from very good coaches, but do you consciously hold the tension in all of the muscles of your body? For example, hold the glutes, hold the, you know, the legs during the descent of the squat, for example, or do you just let it naturally build up? And then again, or do you try to, you know, stretch the joints, so to speak, to get the proper effect? Which is the proper mindset to put during a heavy squat? Obviously, the core is going to be tight. That's not negotiable. But how about the active muscles? Because strictly speaking, if the muscle is truly contracted, you will not actually move. So it's about tension, but how do you go about it? Do you actually think about, you know, stretching the joints, or is it about not controlling that part at all?
Yes, good question. And so, yes, you do not want to drop the weight and completely loose and then catch it, which you see, like you see Olympic lifters do that quite a bit. And I understand why, because they have a sport that is purely concentric based, but you can also look at hip injury and back injury rates in Olympic lifting, and they're extremely high due to that, you know, that dropping into the squat. So you want to have tension, but again, right, if you're fully tight, you're not going to go down.
Yes.
So I don't consciously think about that. What I consciously think about or cue are certain things that drive all that to happen. So if you haven't been on the www.kabuki.ms site yet, I don't know if either of you gentlemen are,
We haven't.
but find the video on advanced rooting, and you'll see what we do with the foot on the floor. And what we're doing with the foot on the floor, if you do that, you will feel a ton of stuff engage from the glutes, the hams, the quads, all of that. And so that's driving everything between the core and the floor to have tension.
The screwing part.
Yeah, so just the screwing one is a more basic one. The advanced rooting is one where we're driving down. It's I don't think I can explain it without the video, honestly.
Okay, we'll watch the video then. Yes.
So watch the video. The advanced rooting one is where you're pushing out on the outer side of the heel, but then also at the same time driving down just to the outside of the inner toe, or the largest toe. Yes. I can't explain it with words. You've got to watch the video, but try that, and then also compare that to the triple point rooting, which a lot of people are starting to promote that now, and we were doing that like 5 or 6 years ago. This advanced rooting technique it'll blow it away. You'll feel tons of engagement through that area, and that's going to control the tightness of all the muscles, and also all the positioning. So you don't have to worry about where my knee is at, or, you know, am I sitting back correctly, or all this other stuff. All of that happens naturally. So that's So that's why, like in my squat cueing, I've only got 5 cues, because those 5 things take care of everything else to happen.
Yes, because people can't remember everything, so you need to make it simple enough that they can hit everything easily.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, so we established that tightness is important, so we should be tight, obviously. Okay,
yes.
So let's go about... Okay, do you believe that higher reps with the basic lifts are more dangerous, potentially, and harmful than lower reps? I mean, we discussed a very interesting strategy with McJew, whereas if someone is chasing performance, it is more beneficial to hit multiple sets with lower reps to break down the volume than to hit lesser sets with the same volume at the end, but lesser sets with more reps, because not only the neurological pattern is different, but the injury rate is going to be higher for the high rep sets. How do you feel about it?
Absolutely agree with him. So we were talking about the 20 rep squat, right? So if you do some of these basic load movements and you do them to high reps, you're going to start breaking down from a fatigue standpoint. I know that if anybody that watches my videos, they're going to see that occasionally I do stuff like that.
Yes, you do.
but it's not something I do in training because there's high risk associated with it. So it is something I'm doing to show something off and do something, but it's not how I train, because guess what? When I do that, my back is sore for 2 to 3 weeks afterwards, because there is no way, if I'm doing 505 pounds for 20 plus reps on squat, that I'm going to be able to hold the correct pressurization. And so I'm not. And so, you know, those last 5 to 7 reps, I'm breaking down, the pelvis is rotating, I'm going into flexion, and I'm at high risk for injury. So the volume is the same whether you get it in that same workout or even a couple workouts over the same day, or sometimes with our clients we may break it into multiple sessions over the week to get the volume load that we want for the week. And so we'll have a lot of multiple sets of lower reps to accomplish the volume that we want.
Do you believe this hurts hypertrophy in any way, or is it roughly the same?
I don't believe it hurts hypertrophy in any manner. Now, I do 20 rep stuff on more basic movements that aren't, you know, like I said, you know, your injury risk with doing 20 bicep curls is,
yes.
We're not talking the same thing.
Yes, of course.
So
of
we're
course.
talking.
Assistance lifts are made for assistance, and obviously they can be done in many ways. So that's interesting, because I feel the same. 3 sets by 8 and 8 sets by 3 is the same volume for the muscle. At the end of the day, it matters if you adapt to a higher stress than not just sitting to a computer. So it's better to actually take the even more healthy approach.
Yep.
Okay, so how do we actually avoid injuries during heavy stuff? What would be the top watch out for things we can watch out and avoid during training? What do you believe are the biggest mistakes everyone makes, and how do we make training less harmful?
Okay, so one of the points I kind of hit on earlier, and you reinforced it, but is every set is practice. It's time to practice perfection. Nearly every time I've hurt myself, or a lot of times when I see people hurt themselves, it's on a lightweight in the warm-ups. And maybe they didn't hurt themselves there, but they had a minor tweak because, you know, I'm working up to an 800-pound squat. What is 225? Let's just work through this really quick. And all of a sudden you get a slight tweak. And then by the time you get up to 500 or 600 pounds, now you hurt yourself. Well, it actually started earlier. So you have to practice perfection. Practice perfection. Quality of movement is king. So I can't reiterate those points enough. Another point is I see a lot of people that continually, they balance, they think the balance with strength training is stretching. So you've got to have mobility with your strength training. And so they do a lot of overstretching of the prime movers before lifting. So before squatting, they're foam rolling or stretching their, you know, their glutes, their hamstrings, their adductors, and all this stuff because they're so tight that it hurts them. But all this does is initiate more risk of injury. So if you're going to stretch, you may stretch your upper back so that you can get in better position and maintain the proper positioning. But you want to focus on movement prep for the movers.
Do you believe this applies to dynamic stretching or just passive stretching?
Mostly this applies to passive stretching. Your dynamic stretching is almost a little bit of a movement, that's movement prep.
Yes.
So, and the other thing with this is a lot of people, if you're so tight in these areas, is they're not understanding that they're moving wrong somewhere to begin with. So what happens if you don't have core stability or proper joint centration? If you're missing either one of these, what the body does is it begins tightening around that joint. So your lack of mobility, if mobility is your problem, is because you're doing something wrong. That is, the body's not automatically going to start tightening up the hips unless you're doing something that is making it tighten up the hips. So if you always have to be foam rolling or stretching, you need to ask the question, why? So there is a risk of injury somewhere, and this is a marker telling you that that you've got something going wrong. So you need to figure out what it is with your lifting that is driving that to happen. So the foam rolling and the stretching, you have to consider as maybe you need to do. Let's say your hips are tight. Well, one, you're not going to stretch your hips before squatting. So maybe you do it the day prior or 2 days prior or something like that. But it is still triage treatment. It is something, okay, you've got to do it because you can't get in position to squat. But understand, stretching isn't the answer. finding what is driving the lack of mobility is the answer. And so if you don't figure it out, you're going to end up injuring yourself at some point.
Do you believe sometimes it could be due to, you know, lifestyle problems, meaning too much of a computer? And does this get solved during proper technique, or does it really have to be, you know, addressed via multiple movement sessions?
So absolutely it can be environmental, and that's where we talked about the core lifts being great fixes for that. But you should be able to, with your training, be able to fix those environmental factors. So, you know, if you've got breathing pattern issues, you're going to have to practice, and that's not going to resolve itself in training. But you're going to be able to see the outputs of that. But yes, your training should be fixes for this stuff that's going on in the rest of your life. But it's interesting, if you have clients that come into the gym that do physical labor versus ones that sit at a desk all day, you'd think that the guy doing concrete work would be all tired and beat up and not ready to train, but usually they're ready to get going and don't need a warm-up, versus your person that's sitting at a desk all day, like, has trouble getting moving, they've got to do a bunch of prep work, and they're usually at higher risk of injury than somebody that's actually been working their body all day long.
Yes, yes, I see. So that's interesting. Do you believe females should lift, and why?
Absolutely. They're human beings just like us.
You see, Chris, the problem is our country, Bulgaria, is still a little bit behind all this strength training. They're still driven by a lot of the very commercial type of bodybuilding. So we're one of the very few gyms to actually have Elite Fitness, Sorinex, and Rock Fitness equipment inside. So actually the only facility to ever have this type of equipment, but not the only strength facility finally. So we're still in the minor. So we're trying to set, you know, the ground here for everyone. That's why we're trying to get the very best coaches in the world to provide the very best information. So how about females getting into better bodies, better structure, better health, even lifting for competition athletes, you know, female athletes? How do you feel about them lifting? Tell us more about your female athletes, for example.
So the funny thing is that if men lift weights, they become more masculine, and if women lift weights, they become more feminine. It doesn't make them bulk up and turn into men. They operate better. It's funny, you can take a woman that is an avid runner, and they're kind of skinny fat, they've got small glutes, they don't look that great, and you can actually have them lift weights. They'll end up looking so much better. So it's just one of those things that just a misconception that people have, and you know, lifting weights is going to be extremely positive and accentuate the natural traits of who we are as human beings.
Yes, we feel the same way. We feel that females should lift and females should be sexy, not just, you know, weak and, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, okay, Chris, what would you advise the young lifters? You know, what did you do correctly, and what do you feel everyone should do when he's young? What must he not miss?
So it's hard to teach this to young lifters because they don't hurt. You know, if you're in your early 20s training, you go into the gym and everything is progress, right? But I can't iterate the point enough that quality of movement is king. And so you've got to, you know, if a lifter's sitting there and they've got a 500-pound squat and they want to bust their butt and they just want to train and not focus on technique, you know, maybe their plateau is going to be 520. But if they work on technique, they basically shift their entire capability upwards. So it's, you know, it's one, you reduce the risk for injury, but your actual total, you know, as far as their potential is so much higher now. So there's neurological things that happen. There's you know physical, like reducing the risk for injury. But I always, with the young lifters, try to tell them, you know, you're going to be able to lift more by doing this because the reducing injury risk doesn't really kind of bite home with them. So just you must have good quality movement before you begin adding load, progressive load. So that's the most important piece that I can tell them. And this is why, you know, I'm doing what I'm doing now, because I had some issues, and I'm broken. There's things I can't do to fix it now, because this is, you know, I'm the movement guru that has, you know, my body doesn't function properly, but it's because I've walked the path, and now I don't want other people to do the same.
So, what would you recommend young lifters do to avoid problems? Can you just go over this one quickly, because we lost it with the software?
Yes. So what I recommend to young lifters is learning as much as possible, mastering technique. Quality of movement is absolutely king. But at the same time, you must also balance this with time in the gym. So it's a balance of extremes. So don't be too analytical, but when I say that, I also expect you to be perfect. And so that it sounds like it's a little bit of antithesis to each other, but it's not. That's why I call it the balance of extremes. I see so many young lifters that fall on either end of the spectrum, where they just don't care about it, and they go in and push themselves too hard or in the wrong ways and beat themselves up, or people that spend so much time, you know, with being over analytical that they never actually get the training in that they need to, or pushing themselves the way that they need to. So you must have both.
Yes, so like I said, we really feel it's wrong for some coach to say fuck technique. I mean, technique is everything, and if you do an exercise correctly, it will add to your life. But if you do it wrong, it will remove your life. So technique is extremely important, and everyone should understand that. Okay.
Absolutely. The quality of movement is king. You must have good quality technique before adding progressive load.
Chris, in your training programs, in your gym guys, you said that you don't use percentage of the weights, but you measure the velocity of the bars. So would you tell us more about these methods, the new kind of training methods that you use?
I certainly will. This is something that I believe is the future of the industry. But before we get into really technical discussion, just say we use velocity as basically a marker. So a lot of people, they might use an RPE, a rate of perceived effort, a number of different techniques for managing basically auto-regulation. And what that means is we want to be able to push ourselves as hard as possible, but not over the edge. So how do we manage that? And so we use velocity to manage that. Okay. So a very remedial approach would be, let's say we were talking about doing 8 sets of 3 on squats earlier. So if we started at, let's say, 0.3 meters per second for set 1, by the time that we get to set 7 or 8, we might be down to 0.28 or 0.27. If I drop below 10 or 15% of my starting velocity, that's my time to stop, because I'm breaking down as far as the quality of movement, the speed that I'm practicing. So that's going to tell me whether I do 6 sets or maybe 9 sets. Okay. So maybe I can get more out of my training than I anticipated. Now, as it gets more technical, what we've done is we've developed profiles. So for every lifter, for every lift, so they've got a profile. And so we'll go through and we'll map it so that we know basically their profile, their speed profile for a lift is much like your fingerprint. It has the same shape as when you were a child. It's only bigger now. So your velocity profile is the same. As you get stronger, your 80% is always the same speed. It's always the same speed. So as you get stronger, we essentially know on any given day, the simplest way to explain it is we know what your theoretical max is, or your actual max is, on any given day, on any warm-up set. We can project it. So it may be 510 instead of 500. It might be because you're up late with the kids or had been a stressful week at at work. It might be 490 or 475. So we can adjust your training based on that. So we can do either. We actually, so for our clients, we actually do a lot of percentage-based programs, but we at that percentage, we know what their speed is, so we give them the tools to make the decision. If they're progressing ahead of plan or behind plan or on plan, they know that, hey, my deadlift is 20 pounds over on a regular, consistent basis, and it's, you know, it's progressing faster than plan, so we're able to add that in there. And trust me, that makes a big difference. Because, like, if I'm doing my deadlift workouts with a bunch of triples with 770 pounds, it's heavy. It feels heavy. And I'm not going to know that, oh, I could actually be doing 780 or 785. But the numbers will give you that level of detail, so you're maximizing every piece of your program. But then again, same thing. It'll tell you, it'll take the ego out and say, you know what? You're not strong enough, or you're not progressing to plan, and it needs to be 750. Or instead of the plan 3 sets, you need to stop at 2 sets. And, you know, sometimes it takes that, you know, that extra little objective feedback to tell you, oh no, I knew I should call it quits, but, you know, it's, the numbers here are telling me that. So we use velocity as a marker, not really to work on being faster, but we can take a basic percentage-based plan and overlay our velocity with it once we've actually developed that lifter's profile. And the profiling can be done in one session. It's pretty easy to do. So we'll walk a lifter through a bunch of different lifts over, you know, heading towards their max, and we'll be able to develop what their curve is for the squat, the bench, the deadlift. And from there, once we've got that developed, we can do, it's pretty cool. So like my last meet, I did a big, giant weight cut. And when you do a big weight cut, you never know where your lifts are. So you can have it planned out, you could be lifting a certain weight in training, but the day of the meet, it's all guesswork because of how your body responded. So we reversed the algorithm so that we could project my max based off my warm-ups, and we knew to within 5 pounds what my max was. And so we did a lift at 3 pounds under my projected max, and everybody says, man, you were lucky if you had another like 2 pounds in you. So, I mean, it's spot on. It's really cool. And so what we found is most of our clients get more out of their training than they would have if they were doing an RPE method, which is the rate of perceived effort, like a scale of 1 to 10, because that's perception. You know, it's subjective feedback. And like I said, if I'm training with 770, what's the difference between an 8 and an 8.5 RPE? Like, how does it tell me, like, I need to add 10 pounds or 5 pounds or 15 pounds? And our method does. So what we do is, like I said, we take a lift and we run the lifter through and we generate a curve, and then from there we have the profile and we know it 80%, 90%, so on, what the lift is. So we're going to be releasing some papers on this methodology. There's a lot of research that demonstrates the validity of what we're doing, but nobody else is really putting it into practice and doing it with a bunch of people like we are. More general approach, like I said, a remedial approach is just to use the drop-off point. So at like 10 or 15% reduction in speed, you call it quits. Okay. So hey, that's your time. You know, you're doing 7 sets instead of the planned 8, or you're doing 9 instead. You can go for 9 instead of 8 that you had planned. So that's another approach to that. So, and then we can also do it completely based on velocity and remove percentages entirely. So we've got a lot of flexibility to do it because it's a very powerful objective marker for your training.
So basically, theoretically, the velocity, since it is always linked to a certain non-changeable in the nature of your own, personal physiology, yep, percentage of your max, you're always able to project your current maximum. So it's not the theoretical maximum, it's actually the actual living maximum, and therefore the yes, program can take that calibration during the workout itself. So it's a pretty amazing strategy, but how do you make the measurement itself? A push band, some other device maybe?
So there's several different items on the market. There's the Tendo unit, which is pretty antiquated. I think that was developed in the 80s or 90s. Yeah. It still works, but it's a little bit antiquated technology. GymAware produces a unit out of Australia. Both those two units are pretty expensive. Then you get into your less expensive models that rely on gyroscope technology, such as your push band. There's another one that is a collar that goes on the bar. The gyroscope method, what we found, is not as accurate as we would like to see. It works really well for squats, kind of hit or miss for deadlifts, has some issues on bench press. Right now we're working with a company called Squats and Science on releasing a low-cost tethered unit. So we supply these for all of our clients right now, but we're not selling them open to the public just yet until we get the cost in production in line. But we're anticipating that we're going to hit the market at $200 a unit, which makes it a viable individual-based item. And I say tethered, there's a line basically that attaches from the device to the bar, that's how the Tendo works and the GymAware works, but those are like $2,000 a piece. So definitely that's a pretty significant investment. I've got a couple of the GymAwares in my gym, but we've got this low-cost tethered unit that we're doing right now, and we should be to market with that at some point. I think down the road the gyroscope method will be, you know, the one that's just you wear on a wrist or put it on the bar or whatever, that just Bluetooths to a phone. It isn't really attached to anything. Those kind of project where you're at in space and then your movement in space. And the technology just isn't quite there to the quality yet that I'd like to see. But I think that's where I think it will be in the future. It's just not there yet.
I see. We are anticipating your product, Chris.
So yeah, it's on our website if you want to read a little bit about it, or you can go on to Squats and Science and read about it. Squats and Science does sell a kit, so you can build your own if you choose. But we're working together to get that into production. And like I said, keep an eye out on both of our pages, and you should be able to see when they come available.
Okay, Chris. How about nutrition? What do you believe a good diet consists of? There are some basic nutritional guidelines you think are important.
Okay. Well, I'm not a nutrition coach, so let me put that out there. But if you do some research or do some looking, you'll see that like once a year I get pretty shredded, and by powerlifting standards, definitely stay pretty lean. But again, I'm not a nutrition coach, so I keep it pretty simple. So when I go to order a meal or eat, I double up my portion of meat, and I remove one carb from whatever it comes from. So basically I'm trying to preferentially get as much protein as possible. Usually I try to get about 250 to 300 grams of protein in a day. So basically, you guys are in kilos, right? So it's, I get about a gram per pound of body fat, or per pound of body weight. So I think that's, I don't know, you'd have to do the math. When I'm dieting, I start pulling out, I start getting my fats a little bit lower so that I can keep carbs and protein high. So I may take my fats down to around 75 or 100 grams, because if I can get the calories down and still have the essential fats that I need, and I can keep the carbohydrates up for training and the proteins up, that will work great for me. And then as I get leaner and leaner, as like I'm going towards a photo shoot, I'll start tapering some of the carbs down as well. So it's just, it's honestly, you know, dieting isn't, in my opinion, that complicated. It's just it's pure math. So you can calculate what your base metabolic rate is. So don't look it up on Google. What you got to do is, and what I do is, you know, track every piece of food that you're eating for like a 2-week period, and you do the math to figure out what your BMR is. So if your weight is staying the same at that, then you divide that out, all the calories over the 14 days, and how many calories you're doing per day. And then to lose a pound of body fat a week, take out 500 calories a day. So 500 calories times 7 days is 3,500 calories, which is 1 pound of body fat. So, I mean, it's not really that complicated. I try to have people only diet for like 8 to 12 weeks max, and then stabilize for like 4 to 6 weeks, then repeat. That way, you don't want to be super aggressive with your diets, and you don't want to diet for really, really long periods of time. Either one of those is going to cause you to rebound and put the fat back on.
I see.
So, you know, like I said, I'm not a diet coach, but those are some really simple, you know, methods for doing that. I've played around with like keto and no carb diets or low carb diets and high fats before. They work great from you know, maybe a health perspective, but from a pure performance gym training perspective, I didn't perform as well as when I dropped the fats down and I was able to keep the carbs a little bit higher for that reason.
I see.
So
okay, let's talk about athletes. Should athletes lift heavy? I mean, do you guys train some pro athletes maybe? Do you feel athletes should train heavy as well as explosive, of course?
It's a mixture. It's a mixture of both. So most of our athletes that are like maximal weight athletes, like a power lifter, we want to be in a little bit more explosive range. It usually carries over really well. So, but it's, you know, we're not having them max out on a regular basis, although we never do that with any of our clients, really. So for the most part, our training is pretty similar. Now, I don't work, just to be clear, because you were asking, like, what clients do I work with? I don't work with any clients specifically myself, so I've got a staff that manages our clients. I don't do any one-on-one training, but I do a lot of consulting. So I consult with a number of pro teams. And like right now, I'm working with a number of different Olympian track and field athletes. So I'm not writing a lot of those training programs. Most of the training programs that we write are for our virtual clients. My staff manages those. Those are mostly powerlifting or powerlifting style training programs that we're writing.
I see. Okay, so do you believe sit-ups are harmful actually? This is a very, 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 you know, common and commercial topic around here. People like to do sit-ups because they don't believe diet and training is that important, obviously. But still, what about sit-ups? What's your take on them?
I don't believe in sit-ups.
Yeah, why? I mean, that's
so, you know, you could reference McGill's work on, you know, loaded flexion. But also, if we talk about dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, it causes kind of a you know, we talked about sucking in is not good, so there's a hollowing effect, and it causes a bit of a disconnect on how the abdominals work in the bracing function. So, and you can actually see it in people that lift. So they'll have all these.
Well, funny apps on the internet, kind of.
It's yeah. Actually, I don't think I can explain it without going through actually training on what I'm looking for. But you know, it breaks down how that IAP, that intra-abdominal pressurization, works. So what I like to do, so think about it. I mean, when is it ever that you reach up into the sky and pull a weight down, right, with your abdominals? That's not how they're using from a bracing function. So just like the erectors, the abdominals, the strength of those is not how the crunching or the extension of the back, either of those, are not actually how we stabilize under movement or do anything in a loaded fashion. That's actually just for moving the trunk around, so to reach and twist and do things. So you need to have those muscles to engage in that, but you don't need that level of like super strength to be able to crunch hard or extend super hard like that. So everything that we do is in that stabilized fashion. So this is where we'd want to do, like I said, a plank or an ab wheel rollout or the stir the pot. Any of those focused on holding the neutral spine position and quality of intra-abdominal pressurization. Now I guarantee you, if you do those, you're going to have fantastic looking abs. So it takes care of that, but at the same time, you're actually practicing doing it in a fashion that is actually going to carry over to, it doesn't matter whether you're an Olympic sport, strongman, powerlifter, track, it doesn't matter. If you're an athlete, this is going to carry over. This is how we create stabilization. This is how we transfer power from the hip to the distal end of you know, the shoulder or the arm. this is where all sports come from. This is what everything comes from. So there's not a crunching or extension or any of that sort of stuff. So, but it causes, without going into the detail, it does cause a breakdown in the process of how that works. So it's not just the loaded flexion. It is causing, you know, an issue with how you're able to create quality IAP. So for me, I don't go there, and you can develop the same amount of abs doing the stir the pot. So
Yeah.
so if there's another way to get there and it doesn't cause those issues, why would you go there?
Of course, I mean, diet is obviously fucking important, not just training. So people should learn how to diet more than crunch more. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yes, so we found that you're attempting a new adventure, actually.
Oh yeah, Chris. How about how about the grants goals?
Yes.
So,
So
actually, for your last competition, when you went down to 220, actually,
yes.
you were not very happy with about it. Actually, you said you will never go back again in 220. So, tell us about this grants kind of goals that you going to.
Yeah, so like I noted earlier, I've been competing for 16 years, and you know, I'm at a point of, and I mentioned earlier too, I've got some trauma to my body, which part of that is my elbows, and so there's some things I do to get around that in training, but prepping for a meet and putting all three together ends up not working very well for me. So it hurts my body. It's hard to recover from. Because it takes out the ways I get around dealing with those issues that I've got. And the other is the last few meets I just haven't been fired up about it. You know, I've done them because I'm like, oh, I'm a power lifter. This is what I do. I've got to go out there and do this. And I was doing it because I felt I had to. And so that's just not working for me anymore. And so I just want to focus on things that get me fired up, things that get me excited to lift again. And I can't really demonstrate all those on the platform the way that I need to. So my first goal is I want to be the lightest person to ever deadlift 1,000 pounds. So the only guys doing it, you know, they're close to 400 pounds. There isn't anybody that's under 300 pounds or close to my body weight at all. So it's going to be a gym lift because I'm going to wear straps, use a deadlift bar and all that other stuff. But that's what I've got to do with where my body is. But that's why I know what I know and what I teach. So I don't feel bad about the condition because it's put me where I'm at in life. So I came pretty close to squatting 1,000 pounds this last training cycle. So obviously that's on my goal list as well. I've got a whole bunch of other goals that I haven't released yet because these first two are going to take a while. I mean, my first run at the 1,000-pound deadlift, I have the training plan penciled out. It's at least a 9-month training plan. So it's not around the corner, and that's pretty aggressive even to get there. You know, that's a big deal. And nobody has ever pulled close to that sumo. The heaviest sumos that I've seen, one was in the 920s, and that was with a powerlifting suit, and then Ed Cohn's 901. As well. So everybody thinks that sumo's easier, but once you get above 800 pounds, it's not. And over 1,000 pounds or over 900 pounds, nobody's pulling sumo. So it's an aggressive goal. So these aren't. Basically, I'm kind of announcing my retirement from competitive powerlifting, but it's not really retirement because I'm going to be chasing epic, crazy goals, things that get me fired up. Those are the first two. There's a whole bunch more, and that's what I'm going to be doing. It's just
we'll be watching you. Okay, good luck.
All right. Thank you.
You mentioned about your elbow injuries, and what about straps? I remember you said that straps have to do something with your arms injuries before.
Actually, they help. So my arms don't straighten. I've had surgery on both of them, so this is. They're very far from straight. So if you're doing a sumo deadlift, and if you imagine your arm doesn't straighten, your elbow's against your leg, that puts one side of the bar about 6 inches out in front of me. So when I put straps on, it takes my bad elbows out of the equation. So that's why you see in my training, all my strap training, and that's one of the things that hindered me on this lat knee prep, is I switched back to taking the straps off and going over under grip. And I can hang onto the bar. It takes, you know, a little bit of weight off my deadlift, but the strain on my elbow ended up destroying my bench press. It carried over into some issues on the squat. Like, that's, you know, prior to switching to the over under, so the meet was in January, January 30th. In December, I squatted 944 and I deadlifted 850 for 5. And I was benching with my Duffalo bar, which is a longer range of motion than a normal bench. I was doing my workouts with 470. Now, once I started switching to over-under, my deadlift did pretty good. I felt I was going to be able to pull in the low to mid-8s, holding on to it. But my bench went way down. My squat started suffering, all this stuff, and I'm still hurting. You know, it's 2 months later now, and my elbow is still hurting at this point, just from that 6 weeks I did of training that way. So to me, it's like I'm not in the condition to actually demonstrate my full level of strength under the environment of the platform due to the issues I've got. So at this point, I've competed long enough. I've done it for 16 years. I think I've proven myself, and I don't feel I need to prove anything else there anymore. So I'm going to just focus on stuff that, you know, that excites me and that I want to do. And I know some people won't like that because they say it doesn't count unless you get up there, but I've been up there. I did it for a long time. So
on the other hand, as they say, any genius who can't get into a certain environment can just invent a new environment for himself. Yeah. So thank you very much, Chris. I believe this is all our questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time. We know you're a busy man. So please, many greetings from Bulgaria, and make sure to come visit us someday if you have the time.
I think I would like to do that. I'm planning a visit over there at some point. I would like to do a tour with doing seminars in different locations. So
we are very invited to do so. By the way.